Hello, hello. Hey, we're gonna get started now. So if you're still eating your lunch, you can eat it at your chair and listen to some invigorating conversation around right to try while you do it. So for those of you that do not know me, again, I'm Dylan Livingston. I'm the founder and CEO of the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives. With me is Brian Norman, the Director of State Affairs for the Goldwater Institute. To give a little context and set the background, A4LI has been pushing a certain expansion of right to try for the past 3 years in Montana successfully, and hopefully in New Hampshire, Arizona, and Nevada are our next target states. The right to try movement was originated from the Goldwater Institute. We stole your idea. So thanks for having good ideas, first of all. But second of all, I find it fascinating how the right to try story started from sort of a state initiative to ultimately a federal initiative signed by President Trump in his first term. So can you kind of give us the background, I guess, story of how right to try started, what the story is from the Goldwater Institute, and what was the purpose, the vision, the expectation? Have the expectations been met?
Yeah, so is this on? A little louder?
Make it a little louder.
Or I can just yell. That's
Yeah,
good too.
we got big voices.
So uh, let's rewind back to 2013, 2014. There were a lot of discussions going on within, call it, center-right libertarian circles about access to the most promising forms of innovative medical treatments. There was a lot of really great developments going on in the world, particularly around cancer treatments at the time. And I think everybody in this room knows a lot of the struggles of getting innovative therapies in the hands of the people who most need them in a timely fashion. And so back then, there hadn't been much of a movement to date to try to fix this issue. The FDA had its initial compassionate version of its compassionate use program. There were problems with that at the time. So we felt like a broader fix was needed. And we knew that going to Congress right off the bat probably was not going to work because stuff often does not work in Congress, period. They don't like to work. um, so, so we started out with the states. Our initial strategy was we wanted to make this a bipartisan effort. So um, we chose a purple state to start with, Colorado, and the idea was that under the 14th Amendment, you have the substantive due process right to longevity or your life, your health interests. Um, and so we started in Colorado with a bill stating that if you have a terminal illness, you can access investigational treatments that have passed phase 1 of FDA clinical trials. From there, we tried picking off blue states and red states one at a time. Ultimately, from 2014 to 2018, 41 states ended up passing the bill. And by that time, we thought there was ample proof of concept and enough momentum and support, grassroots support, to take it to Congress. And so Senator Ron Johnson at the time was the Senate champion of that reform. And we had a multitude of House champions, Andy Biggs being one of them, if you're in local Arizonan. So it ended up about a 2-year effort in Congress, passed. Donald Trump signed it, and the rest is kind of history there. I would say that the number one positive outcome of that whole movement was the FDA implementing actual reforms to their compassionate use program. Now it's up to I think 99% of compassionate use applications are now approved in a somewhat timely manner. You still have the right to try pathway available to you that kind of removes the FDA from the decision-making process. But yeah, that's kind of the background, the history of it all, and we're glad to see organizations like yours building on the concept and creating innovative treatment center models, expanding out patient eligibility. That's all great. We have our own new reform that we're working on that's focused on individualized therapies for rare and ultra rare disease patients. So there's a lot of innovation in the space.
Yeah, I want to get into that. But first, I kind of want to talk about, the maybe gaps that the original right to try, uh, have left to fill. And, what we saw specifically with right to try was the fact that, taking the longevity mindset in consideration, what you realize is terminal illness is too close to death to ultimately intervene if we actually want wide scale positive health outcomes, right? And what the industry kind of teaches you is preventative health, proactive health is the way to go. That is essentially the thesis behind the geroscience hypothesis, right? It's kind of maintaining and reversing the damage ultimately of these parts of your cell to ultimately prevent or prevent these diseases from cropping up. So my point in saying all of this is that's the takeaway I got from Right to Try 1.0. It's a no-brainer idea, but if we want to improve health outcomes even further, there are these second level implementation steps that can be taken to improve on the law. So what are you guys trying to do with Right to Try 2.0, and what gaps are you trying to address?
Yeah, I totally agree with you that the gap problem that you raise. I think at the time we had to go with a concept that could pass. Going to Congress and saying we're going to strip like a ton of your oversight capabilities for every patient in the United States and apply this to longevity science as well. Like that was a really big ask back in 2018. And so with what the effort we're working on now is centered on life-threatening and severely debilitating illnesses. So that's the patient eligibility category. So that expands it out quite a bit. It would encompass most rare and ultra-rare genetic conditions for whom 95% don't have an FDA-approved treatment option. From there, we're also, since individualized therapies have a tough time going through the regulatory scheme of the FDA, there isn't a sufficient oftentimes to even get a phase 1 clinical trial going. FDA has acknowledged this. That's why they're creating the plausible mechanism pathway. So in order to get around that regulatory mismatch, we kind of remove phase 1 as the benchmark by which you can access under Right to Try. So for Right to Try 2.0, it's now, is it individualized? Do you have a severely debilitating or life-threatening condition? And then is the manufacturer operating within a facility that holds a federal-wide assurance? Just means, do they abide by all the rules and regs for research in human subjects? And so that IRB within the eligible facility would act as the safety check on any crazy physicians or that might want to do wild things with gene therapies. So those are the kind of the improvements, the gaps we're trying to fix there. Gaps for rare and ultra rare disease patients, being able to access individualized treatments, gene therapies, immunotherapies, all that good stuff, and then getting rid of that phase 1 requirement for this narrow category of treatments and patients.
And it makes a lot of sense to remove the phase 1 requirement specifically for these N of 1. And we were talking about this a little bit outside, but that makes a ton of sense. I have seen this in other states that are potentially going to be thinking about adopting our idea of Right to Try by kind of extending it to all patients. But I see some of these groups pushing for the removal of these phase 1 trials as a requirement, even in healthy patients. And so I guess I kind of have really one question. Maybe I could break it into two, but I'll try to sum it into one. How exactly did you at first convey this risk, or not risk, but the idea that safety could be kind of done away with to the to the champions of the Right to Try 2.0? Are they concerned about that? Because I am concerned about that. I don't want to remove safety altogether, especially if we're giving it to healthy patients. Is there any pushback on that? Do you see anything on that?
An oddly small amount of pushback, and I think that's because I'm such a good lobbyist.
Nice.
But the way I explain it is it's tied to the patient category, right? So the calculus is different if you're a healthy young man or a healthy young woman, and you go to your doctor and you say you want to try a very innovative N of one treatment for what? Why? Um, so whenever we're talking about rare and ultra rare disease patients, 95% of whom do not have an FDA approved treatment option, they're kind of left holding the bag, for lack of a better term. There's nothing there for them already, and if their disease continues to progress, it will turn into a life-threatening or terminally or a terminal illness. So early intervention is key and necessary, and you can't have early intervention if you wait on phase one. Phase one's likely never going to occur with a lot of these N of one type treatments. So that's how I get around that type of pushback. It's because it's a narrow patient category.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, I mean, there is, I think, somewhat reasonable hesitation when you're giving it to a healthy person, right? And I guess this becomes less like medical and more philosophical. Like, do you trust someone to make the decision about their own medical journey more so than some regulators,
I
right?
do.
I mean, I generally do too, but I do believe that the government is here to preserve life, and that's in the founding of the country. And without regulations, I think we do risk some degree of illnesses or death without having it run completely unchecked. So yeah, I say here to you. I understand where you're coming from. I want to talk about something else, and this is something that when we went to Montana to do this right to try bill, and in New Hampshire, and everybody I talk, every state government official that I speak to, what I talk about is the prospects for economic development, specifically for the longevity industry in Montana and New Hampshire, in that it will attract a whole new industry, the longevity industry, to move in there because they can dose patients and build research parks around this right to try sandbox that we're creating. So for Right to Try 2.0, what are some of the prospects for biotech companies and researchers? How do you see Right to Try 2.0 helping them achieve faster or better or sooner or quicker?
I think the most promising part of Right to Try 2.0 in that sense is the research potential, because you have to go through a lot of safety checks and whatnot whenever you're working through an eligible facility. You're likely hiring high-end researchers, top-of-the-line researchers, to do this type of research for you. And whenever you pair that with what the FDA is trying to do with the plausible mechanism pathway, Right to Try 2.0 presents a new potential data source if they implement the plausible mechanism pathway in a good manner. It presents a good potential data source. So yeah, there is an economic development factor to this.
Totally.
Around research hospitals, innovative biotechs that want to get involved in this and work through a research hospital. I mean, the potential is really endless, especially in the age we live in.
Well, and what I also like to say too is for the investors, right? You're getting companies that are going to generate human data earlier than they otherwise would have, whether it's in a controlled trial or not. It's not irrelevant, but for the purposes of seeing data in a human, it's earlier in the timeline, right?
Which I think, of concept,
proof of concept way sooner. And it's also from what I've seen with what we've done in Montana and New Hampshire, this attracts a lot of companies that maybe are struggling to raise. It's very hard. We talk about the valley of death a lot in biotech. You kind of raise a decently sized seed round or a Series A, but you need to get that $50-100 million for that Series B. And that's a struggle, right? But what this does is it allows those companies that are maybe struggling there to prove that this is actually efficacious and we deserve that $50-100 million. So that's the way I kind of spin it. I don't know if you see it the same way.
I definitely do, and we've had several companies come to us seeking information about Right to Try 2.0, how they can get a program launched. Can we hook them up with any decent eligible facilities that they can work within? So I think this is definitely something that the space can get excited about, in terms of getting that pitch deck together for their next fundraising round. Yeah, and if there are any startups in here, the Goldwater Institute is more than happy to provide legal advice to you on how you can spin up a right to try program. We even will represent you if the government decides to come after you and you're doing things above board. But yeah, so that's a service we provide.
And that's it's funny you say that. That's actually been one of the biggest concerns. And we should probably talk about this after, but uh, what we're trying to push for in parallel to these other states is the federal government to put out a directive that explicitly states that it will not interfere with companies participating in right to try programs in different states, as long as they are not negligent and are generally above board and doing things ethically. So we should talk about that. But I do think that will be a big piece in this whole effort, because there is this ambiguity of whether the FDA will crack down or not. When we got the Montana bill passed in 2023, we were just kind of in limbo, and it was arguably an administration that was less friendly to these ideas, and so we were like, hey, are they going to come down and crack down on this? They fortunately didn't. But I do see this directive as being a way to assure biotechs, clinicians, investors that this is a legitimate pathway. So we should talk. I can keep going, but we should talk about that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest surprises for the Institute with the original right to try was, the Colorado passed it in 2014 under the Obama administration. The FDA never took a single action related to right to try laws within the states, and we knew of several providers who were offering right to try treatments in various states, red and blue, and the FDA never took an enforcement action against them, which was very, very surprising. But I do agree, a non-enforcement policy would really set this thing on fire.
It would be in writing.
Yeah, and that's why we're seeking a federal right to try 2.0 law to give regulatory certainty around this space, and give individuals in all 50 states obviously access.
Yeah.
But also, I have a question for you. So with the Montana model and these treatment centers, something that I've wondered about is the federal government's rules around not making a profit for on investigational treatments. So how is the industry approaching that? And because I know 2% of profits in that model go back to the government to fund the program and whatnot.
Exactly.
So how are y'all approaching it? How do you?
It's a tricky question, because historically the ethical standard is exactly what you said. There's no profit, and especially in these investigational clinical trials, investigational drugs, right to try. What we did in Montana is we actually allowed for it, right? Really because, one, the companies that are in play in Montana are going to be companies that have already passed a phase 1, if they're going to be given to a patient that's healthy or not terminally ill, which signifies some level of legitimacy, right? And so the way that I see it is we have legitimate companies that are burning through money every year. I mean, if you look at even a public biotech company, they're posting tens of millions of dollars in losses per year. And this is a way for people to ultimately basically help fund research for a drug that they, I think, like enough to try experimentally, right? And so that's the idea behind the profit. It's not so that, some company can stop after a phase 1 and just start selling drugs in Montana. It's so that, these companies will ultimately get more money for research and, validation on the drug that they're pushing for, right?
I think as we think about the cost recovery formula, there's probably, if we can't get the federal government to go with non-enforcement of that policy, at the very least they could tinker with cost recovery to improve the situation.
Totally.
For these startups.
Well, just broadly also, I mean, biotech has been, I partially blame myself because I started A4LI in 2022, and before 2022 it seemed like the biotech markets were booming. And then I started A4LI, so I don't know what's going on there. But anyways, we've been in this lull for the last couple of years, right? And so I think more broadly, I think right to try plays to this. I think obviously more SBIR, STTR funding plays a big part in this as well, research funding. But then, ways to incentivize investors and companies to ultimately claw back some of that, capital they're spending on R&D. So again, we'll talk offline, but it sounds like we're cooking up some good ideas here. I had 2 more questions for you. I wanted to maybe get an audience question in as well. But you kind of segued into it perfectly before. You talked about red and blue, and everything we do at A4LI is intentionally bipartisan. One, because we all age, no matter if you're red, blue, black, white, whatever you are, you age, right? This is a universal thing that we all deal with. And so we should kind of be united in the effort to address the diseases and the disabilities of aging. But then also, I think, strategically, right, we see how often Congress changes. We see, how diverse the state governments around the country are. So it would be silly to kind of just pick one side or the other. With that all being said, I do think that there are some aspects of longevity that fit more nicely with Democrats and Republicans. And I think also right to try as well has that bipartisan appeal, but not quite as much, right? It was a Trump initiative. We've only worked with Republicans at the state level in Montana and New Hampshire. Obviously, Arizona is a traditionally Republican state. The Goldwater Institute is named after Barry Goldwater. So how do you kind of pitch this to Democrats? Because I see it as a bipartisan initiative. You do, but I think the history of right to try indicates that it's probably more Republican leaning.
It's been a really interesting experience. At the state level, in the 17 states in which we've gone in and got this passed, it has been broadly bipartisan. We've had Democrats as lead sponsors, co-authors, every level of involvement. It's been unanimous or near unanimous in almost every state. But whenever we go and have these conversations on Capitol Hill, that's whenever it becomes partisan, and it's hard to generate that Democrat interest. And I think it's because Donald Trump bear hugged right to try and has talked about it several times, and so now it's a politicized issue. But in the states, it is not politicized, which I just find very fascinating. And so whenever I'm talking to Democrats, I really lean on the gap of accessibility for rare and ultra rare disease patients to innovative treatments right now. They're getting left behind by, I blame the federal government and how drugs are regulated, but also by, pharma broadly speaking. There just hasn't been as many solutions available to them because it's not economic to put a rare disease drug on the market. So talking about their plight and their struggles gets a lot of Democrats on board, and having patients tell their own unique stories to these elected officials is incredibly important. We have numerous patient advocates all across the country. Folks with Duchenne muscular dystrophy have been a big patient population that has been very loud about this. So having patients tell their own individual stories has been very effective. I can talk all day about the technicalities and the economic benefits and whatnot, but hearing from the mouth of a patient who is impacted by their lack of access to innovative treatments, that's what does the most. That's what's the most impactful, and that's what makes it bipartisan. But Congress is a different story.
It's funny you bring that up. I got one more question for you. Hopefully, we'll get an audience question. But it's funny you bring that up because I've thought about this quite a bit about the longevity advocacy space in general. Genetic disease advocacy groups obviously can point to someone specific who has that disease and can say, "You're not going to fund research into that, like you're to help them. Like, what are you kidding me?" Right? For a cancer patient, for an Alzheimer's patient, you can point to people who are very visibly, physically afflicted by a disease, right? And for aging and longevity, you kind of don't have that because what are we going to point to? Like a 95-year-old who doesn't have any chronic diseases, and we're going to say, like, we want to try to be like how do we kind of frame that patient advocacy thing? So I just bring that up because I find it interesting you talk about that, and I've thought about that. The last thing I just want to quickly ask you, because we're in Arizona, you talked about purple states. I would say this state is about as purple as it comes. So to me, and for years, I've thought Arizona is a great target for an expansion of right to try. So, can you kind of talk about any state initiatives? How can, people in this room be effective and helpful to get more expansions under right to try in Arizona specifically?
In Arizona specifically.
Contact your congressperson.
Talk to Katie Hobbs and get her
Katie
on
Hobbs.
board, because I can say pretty confidently that I think the current state legislature would be receptive to an idea like this. There's a lot of talk around other types of experimental therapies out there, ibogaine, other psychedelics that they're trying to push forward on creating programs for those. So they've, I mean, Arizona was the first state to pass right to try for individualized treatments. So there is an appetite, there's a hunger. Arizona has led on trying to create a friendly regulatory environment for tech to try to take some of those California companies away from Gavin Newsom and bring them over here, which they've been somewhat successful with. So I think there's an appetite, and the economic development argument out here, I think, would play well. Yeah,
It tends to.
as
Politicians like
they like jobs.
jobs. That's really all they. I don't know. Congressman Schweikert isn't here, so maybe he would disagree. But yeah, they like jobs. They like people in their district doing well because that means they're going to get voted in again, right? So that's their job, and bringing innovation, bringing new jobs, bringing good jobs where people move and stay and build a life is attractive for politicians.
I think my other piece of advice would be like make it. There's a lot of people in this room. If y'all each contacted your local representative, make this feel like a grassroots movement, which it is.
Yeah.
And then they start talking about it. Hey, I've been getting a bunch of outreach. Have you heard about this? Like, what's this A4LI?
Right.
That's how they all talk to each other. They all get together and they chat about what their constituents are coming to them. And if there's a common theme, then they're more open to addressing a policy.
And that's what I was saying in my opening remarks today, is that the goal of this event specifically is to build that community in Arizona, because we see the government as a potential leader in longevity and right to try and funding research, right? And so we want to build this community here. So I encourage you all to get in touch with Brenda and I after this event, because you guys are the community that we're trying to build and create out here. We got 2 minutes and 53 seconds, so that's probably time for like one, maybe two questions. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts they want to share?
Well, I think just to slightly push back just a little bit. These are not healthy people that would be utilizing right to try under. Yeah.
I think I should probably answer this one because that's our bill. I spoke about this I think a little bit before, but I really think it stems from the fact that people are doing this anyways. They are going to Antigua. RFK is a perfect example. He went to Antigua to get a non-terminally ill experimental treatment for his throat condition, right? There was not a lot of data on that one, right? But he still did it. And why did he do it? Because he had access and he was able to. Brian Johnson got to go get a gene therapy in Prospera, right? He's doing it anyways. People are doing it anyways. And this is not to say you have to try, right? But if you are going to try, we want to provide the safest possible option for you in America, where data can be collected, you can be monitored, not just given a shot on a jungle somewhere and be sent on your merry way, right? And so that's why I pushed this bill specifically. I think there's questions on how far it should go, right? Like the New Hampshire one we're pushing is more in line with right to try 2.0, in that it expands eligibility to people with serious and debilitating diseases. That's what New Hampshire was comfortable with, right? And so we're interested in opening up access all around, because that helps biotechs, that helps patients. Whatever the state is comfortable with is what we'll go with. Montana just happened to have a bigger appetite, I would say, for the risk, but also for the business and potentially the reward, right? And so I think that's my answer to you, but it's something that I worry about, right? That's why I'm still involved in kind of the ecosystem building in Montana to make sure that, the people that I think, and I think A4LI team think should be involved are involved to make sure this is as safe and responsible as possible. To collect that data, to ensure, right, it can be reported to the company. Exactly. Yeah. Well, and it is. It's, we talked about a lot here, but this is something I talk to specifically people in the research community. I would say there's, different levels in the longevity field for appetite on this topic, right? And, I think the worst thing that could happen for a field, I said it before, is someone getting really sick and, something being on the front page of New York Post about how the longevity industry killed or got, a bunch of people really sick. So we want to do this with the safety in mind. But yes, creating infrastructure, standards, oversight, compliance measures is the best way to do it if people are going to do it anyways. That's our take, and that's why we're pushing it specifically for longevity. With that, I think we probably, what do you think, Brenda? Good? All right, we're good. Thank you all.